Okay, greetings, brothers and sisters. This is going to be a slightly different video. One of my viewers asked me about the thing to do with Draymond Green, the basketball player for the Golden State Warriors, and him choking out another player. And, I wasn't going to comment on that, but actually I think it's a good thing. And my wife and I watched this docu-series called The Blue Zones, which was somewhat interesting on one level, but ultimately it's a Agenda 21 shill series, and I want to cover both those things here. In a voiceover, I don't have time to do my regular type video, so I want to do these things differently. But let's start off with the Draymond Green thing. Basketball and all sports are entertainment, and for that reason, they manipulate the games to make them more entertaining. Also, they have a relationship now and have forever with illegal gambling. When I first started covering this, professional football was a $20 billion a year industry, but the gambling on football was like 80 or $90 billion. And now these professional sports, these leagues have a relationship with gambling, with online gambling. You have these athletes who are now spokesmen, the Manning brothers, and other athletes are spokesmen for these gambling sites, sportsbook, and some of these other things. And the leagues themselves have a relationship with these gambling organizations, which was unheard of in terms of the integrity of the sport years and years ago. Whatever was taking place was underhanded, right? Was not, it wasn't an out in the open relationship. There's now the Oakland Raiders are now in Las Vegas, where Las Vegas was always sort of the Mordor of professional sports, and, or the Voldemort, I don't know. It was just never thought about. There was a UNLV Running Rebels had a championship level college basketball team, but Vegas and gambling corruption went hand in hand. And so what you're seeing out there is entertainment / money-making gambling / a real game / I don't know which it's the most, which of those things is, it's like 80% a real game, and I don't know, 60% a real game, 30% entertainment, and 10%, I don't know, like how you would categorize it, right? Because not everybody who watches sports gambles, and they have to play a real game. And that's what people don't understand. The game has to be real. They have to be competitive. It has to be really competitive. They can't fake it being competitive, right? It has to be, where the players are trying to win. And they can't really be aware of it being rigged as much as it is, because then they won't care about it. They'll just take their money and, go out there and give a half-hearted effort. So that for the most part, they have to believe that, their work it's not fixed. Otherwise, it's entertainment. They're not actors. They're not good actors if you see them do commercials or any of these other things. But, there is entertainment involved. We see the stuff with Taylor Swift and all these kind of things. And, everything's about synergy and merging things together and expanding your audience and, making it more global. I mean, there's all these aspects of it, right? So when people say the sports is rigged, well, it's not binary. Like, it's not, it's not like, say, professional wrestling. There's more to it than that, right? There is a game being played. It's just that they, at times, manipulate the outcome, and whatever that means. In a way that it's hard to detect, but sometimes you're like, well, that was pretty obvious, right? And they can do it with officiating and any number of things. So, people think that there's magnets on the ball. There's like a toy, like a training tool you can use that has a small ball that is magnetized, and gloves that are magnetized, which makes it easier to hold on to the football. But it's not, you can't do that with a basketball. It's just like stupid. But anyways, having said that, when I watch sports, it's because I, used to play sports and was a sports person and grew up with, other, jocks and, in my family and my friends and people like that who were, into sports. And I have gone long periods of time without paying attention to sports. Like 5, 10 years, different, 5, 7 years at times. There are times I didn't have a TV. But recently I've been interested in it. I don't know, because it's like one of the few connections I have to my like previous life, before I started doing Sajmarg and before I became a truther on the internet and, before all these things, before my family and, my early years. And I don't have contact with my old friends, and I don't have contact with pretty much all that, I used to be into. And so it's one of the few things that I'm used to doing. It's relaxing for me. It's not thoughtful, right? I don't have to, think about it. So I, watch sports, and because I can tape them, I wouldn't watch it if I couldn't tape them. I could fast forward. I don't have to watch the whole game. I can watch the beginning, the middle, the end, if just the end if I want, if it's, something like that. Sometimes I even know the outcome. Like I watch a game a day later and I've seen what the score is. And it's, I hear it's a good game. I watch it. It's still entertaining, even though it's not as suspenseful as it could be, And so one of the teams I really like in terms of one of my favorite teams in professional sports right now is the Golden State Warriors, because of the way they play basketball. They play basketball the way that I enjoyed playing basketball, the style of basketball they play, the way they move the ball, the shooting, the spacing of the floor. And, in some ways it's, when it was at its peak, and it's certainly not as it peaks now, it's very entertaining to watch, and there's a flow to it, right? And there's things I don't like about the Warriors. They were very pro the boop. They pressured Andrew Wiggins into getting it. The whole thing with Kyrie Irving, like Kyrie Irving stood up to something that, they didn't. They went the opposite direction. And the coach, Steve Kerr, is, spoken out about a lot of woke stuff that, anti-truther stuff, right? And so they're not truther at all as a team. But in terms of basketball, they play a beautiful form of basketball. Very entertaining. And I've watched this stuff with Draymond Green over the years. And as much as I like the way the Warriors play basketball, Draymond Green is, he's a great player and he has unique abilities, and he's a fighter. He's somebody he's undersized, but he can guard bigger players, and like he's an underdog that has excelled. But sometimes he's just an absolute thug and punk. And he does stuff that makes it hard to root for the Warriors. He's kicked a guy in the nuts, like, very flagrantly. But he instigates people and bullies them, and, he does things that are, just villainous, and he seems to be oblivious to those things. Now, he punched a teammate last year, and it caused the Warriors to have a horrible year. They traded away the teammate who has his own issues. He's, selfish, a younger player, but a much smaller person. And Draymond Green punched him. Chris Rock went after Draymond Green in his comedy special. I think because of that, because he was talking about Will Smith and all that stuff, right? But he's just done a lot of these things where, he wrecks the game. And I played with people like this. When I used to play pickup basketball, and there are people who just, who end up wrecking the flow of the game by, who do things that are, just cross the line, calling fouls that didn't exist, and playing mind games and doing whatever they were doing. And most recently, Draymond Green he did a bunch of punky things, like, which would make you think that he's spiraling in some sort of a way. He had a couple of issues with, he was playing this team, the Minnesota Timberwolves, and he got into with some of their players. He got into with the Cleveland Cavaliers. He got in front of this guy, Jared Allen, and tried to provoke him into a fight. And then he shoved another player, and the player came back and responded, and they went back and reviewed the tape, and they threw Draymond Green out. But they should have thrown Draymond Green out a lot more. He berates the officials when he's obviously fouled the person, and he's like somebody who's kind of unbalanced. And as he's gotten older, when someone plays emotionally, like Dennis Rodman was like this, somebody who's an overachiever, and a lot of their greatness is hustling and being emotional and being fired up. As you get older, you lose that, because things, you're playing an adult kid's game professionally. There's something weird about the whole thing, right? something that's more for the youth. And as you get older, it's harder to emotionally get up to play sports. I went through this myself. I recognized that playing sports was good for me physically as I got older, but I just, I was unmotivated to do so, right? It just didn't mean that much to me. Even though I enjoyed it when I got out there, it's just, whatever. And as you get older, your body just doesn't respond and you're not into it. It's more of a young person's thing, right? And the Warriors are kind of struggling right now. A couple of their players, Andrew Wiggins and Klay Thompson, are shooting horribly. What makes them a good team is they're smaller than the other teams. They have a small team that's great at shooting and, good offensively, but they're not shooting well. They're doing horribly. Klay Thompson looks like he wants to give up. He's like he's quit or something. And he got into it with a younger player. He grabbed the player's jersey. The guy responded by grabbing his jersey, and they swung each other around midcourt. And it looked worse than it was. And this guy Rudy Gobert, who is a very unpopular French player, who's 7'2" or something like this. He's the guy who touched the microphone when COVID hit, and his teammates got pissed at him, and they traded him away because no one liked him on his team. And he ended up grabbing Klay Thompson, and Draymond Green came over and got him in a chokehold and wouldn't let go. He hates Rudy Gobert because they're both up for Defensive Player of the Year, and Rudy Gobert can't guard people on the perimeter. There's players who are good, who are tall, who protect the rim. It's tall people who have good jumping ability or long arms or whatever, and they block a lot of shots or change a lot of shots, and they prevent people from driving to the rim. And Rudy Gobert is good at that, but he's not good at guarding people on the perimeter, and Draymond Green thinks that makes him not qualified to win Defensive Player of the Year, but he's won it twice, right? And they've got into it verbally a little bit, so Draymond Green doesn't like him. So Draymond Green saw the opportunity. You can just tell, you could see that this was, it wasn't something that most people would know about unless they've seen some of these games. Draymond Green has a sort of a podcast. He has a podcast and he works for Turner because he says things, he's a little bit more, edgy than some of the other players or whatever it is. But anyways, the NBA suspended him for 5 games, and the Golden State Warriors, Steve Kerr, who they've been supportive of him in the past, are finally drawing a line and saying, this is it. You can't behave this way, right? He hasn't spoken on the issue, but when he got thrown out of the Cleveland Cavaliers game, he said, I know how to be me better. You guys are all criticizing me, saying I shouldn't get these things. He gets a lot of technical fouls, and he does a lot of cheap shots. I mean, he's just, it's the kind of thing it's basically cheating in one way or another. It's not cool, right? And a lot of times that stuff backfires, and it did for him the other night, and he did a couple of days before that, right? But he was defending his actions and saying that, no one's better at being him than him and all this goofy stuff. But I'm seeing this on, there's a lot of conflict I covered on a video that's going to be up tomorrow on my other channel, where I get into the senators going at it. One senator and a Teamster or a union guy, we're going to have a fist fight in the middle of a meeting. Of course, we have Joe Biden, who's openly senile. I show a clip of him, and he's wandering around the stage when he's supposed to be hanging a wreath. And then these 2 congressmen who got into it, the former leader of the House, whatever his name is, Kevin McCarthy, elbowed another dude in the kidneys. It's a whole thing, right? And you see in this more that they can't contain things. What's going on with Israel and Palestine, they can't really contain things, right? People can't control their emotions. People are flipping out, and you're going to see this escalate over time, where people are just going to be going postal left and right, and someone like Draymond Green, they're more sensitive to it, right? Because there are already people who cross the line, and they're going to have trouble not going even further. Draymond Green was embarrassed last year for sucker punching his teammate, and somebody leaked the video of him doing it, and he wasn't punished by the team, which is kind of effed up, and led to their collapsing as a unit, right? He messed up the whole thing, and he's doing it now again to a team that is aging out. Their chance of being champions or even being relevant is passing them by, right? They're getting older, and all the rest of it. It just wears you down. You only have a window where you're either too young and you're too inexperienced to win, to where you're too old and you're injury prone and don't have enough energy. So you have this short window in sports to excel, and the Golden State Warriors are at the edge of their window, and Draymond Green was doing everything in his power to sabotage that, right? The game hadn't even started when this thing broke out. They hadn't scored a point. It was the first time three players were ejected before a point was scored. I mean, the game was just getting going, and it was like a minute or two into the game, and Draymond Green saw a chance to choke Rudy Gobert out because he hates him or whatever, and just it was a complete like punk move on his part, right? And they defended it for a while. I'm sure he was defending it, saying that he was actually choking Klay Thompson, Rudy Gobert. Like Rudy Gobert shouldn't have grabbed his own. He should have grabbed his own player, not the opposing team's. That's always kind of a no-no, but it happens. And because they're trying to break up the fight, and Draymond Green got him in a chokehold and was trying to choke him out. Right? He was, trying to make him pass out. The video is kind of funny of Rudy Gobert's arms waving. If you ever see the thing, I'll show pictures of it while I'm talking about this. But anyways, to me, it's a sign of a bigger problem, which is, anger and people's inner condition and people not being able to suppress things that are inside of them. And I think you're going to see this more and more. And like I said, I cover it again on my other channel, which the video will be up most likely tomorrow. I'm uploading it right now. The next thing I want to talk about is this thing called the Blue Zones, which is a Netflix show. And the show features a guy who some years ago, maybe 30 years ago or something, he was interested in finding out what made people live longer. He went to these places where people were living into their hundreds, and they were like spots around the globe where there was a concentration of people who had longevity, who were outliving the average lifespan, and many of them are living into their hundreds, and they were living into their hundreds and still being active, like they were still able to, work and function. And like there was a couple of people where they went and checked the person's ID, and then went and checked the national records to make sure this guy was actually 100 because he seemed like he was younger. I met someone like this years and years ago who was a practitioner of the Sajmarg meditation that I do. And he had two kids who were wealthy and lived in America, but they had bought houses in Hyderabad near his house. And he was retired. And he brought us to his kids' house, and they were these luxury houses, especially for India, that were built into the mountains. There was like some hills there, and there was red rock, like you see in Utah and Arizona and places, New Mexico, or in, Nevada. And the red rocks, like some of the walls were actually just, stone. Like it was neat. We had a whole thing. They had indoor pools, and the guy, I don't know why he was showing the houses, but he also showed us this trail. And he was walking on the trail, and he slipped, and he was wearing like sandals, and he hit the ground, and I thought he was like 60, 70 years old. And he bounced right up like he wasn't even, hurt. And his wife was in a wheelchair, and she was like, she had strokes, and she was basically a zombie or vegetable. And she was, like incapacitated. He was taking care of her. And he asked us how old we thought he was, and we were like, I don't know, 60, 70. He was like, I'm 92, right? And I was like, wow, like that's like impossible, right? He's, 20, 30 years younger than he should be. And very, energetic and all these things. And he told a story where he was riding in a car with Babaji, the second master of the system, years and years ago when he was a young guy, so probably, 50, 60 years ago. And Babaji fell on him. And he said he felt this energy just go through his system. So I always attributed his longevity to that, right? But anyways, let's get back to the show, just a little bit of sidebar there. So the show was interesting, another sort of, non-binary thing. There was some good information in it, but it was ultimately propaganda. And so he went to these different places, and most of them were by the ocean, which he really didn't point out because that's significant. And he pointed out different things that made these people live longer. He talked a lot about their diet, talked about having a purpose, and these were things I was talking to my wife about beforehand, like when we were watching it, before they talked about it in the show. Because the most important thing is to have a purpose. And, it's not about how long you live, it's about how you die, right? I just made a long, to the end of my 128th Journey Series video. I just talked about my trip to see my parents for the last time. And my dad was a skeleton, like a living skeleton. He always been kind of overweight. He had a, big pot belly. He called his little bonza. He loved to eat. He loved to watch TV, whatever it was. And he couldn't do any of those things anymore. Like he couldn't do anything because he couldn't see, and he, couldn't really digest food anymore, like properly. And so he was a shell of a person, scared of death. He couldn't wipe his own ass, couldn't frickin' bathe himself. He had a nurse come in and, just pathetic, right? Shriveled down to nothing and, miserable life, right? Just physically, not able to do anything, but scared of dying and, just looks like a walking ghoul or corpse. And the, insurance company or the medical companies are, medicating him, keeping him alive and doing whatever they can as long as there's some money left until the person goes broke or they run out of insurance and then they let the person die, right? And who wants to go out like that? And my dad talked about his retirement for years. He worked as a guidance counselor, said he hated his job. But as soon as he quit his job, he fell apart. He became, mentally unstable. He became sort of racist and like anti-Semitic, even though like his two best friends were Jewish and he worked in the inner city. And, with people of color, he just kind of like lost it. Like my grandmother lived into her 90s, but she lived with them and he was scaring them with his he was just kind of losing it, talking to himself a lot and only because he didn't have a purpose anymore. He didn't have a goal. Like people who are farmers, they die in the field, right? They're out there every day and doing these things. And that was part of this longevity thing, growing, having gardens and things. So the guy goes through these various things, and some of the things are legitimate. And, most of these people had some sort of spiritual community or they were, spiritual in some way or another. It's the things that are, and their diet, of course, is important. And, but to me, it's the biggest thing is to have some sort of goal or purpose because this idea of retirement and that you're just going to party for the end of your life, I see this a lot, in the older generation, people who are drinking all the time until they go to a nursing home, right? And, they're just out there playing golf and doing things like this. People have money. And people who don't, are better off because they have to work until the day they die. And, no animal retires. No animal goes, all right, I'm not going to be a lion anymore. I'm not going to be a cow. I mean, you do the same thing until you can't do it anymore. That's, and you drop dead doing that thing that you're supposed to be doing, right? My wife and I are going to be farming until we can't do that anymore, and that'll be it, right? But anyways, the one thing they excluded they kept on saying a vegetarian diet, having very little meat in their diet. And my wife and I knew like they were talking about the Mediterranean diet, and some of these people had sheep, and one guy had cows in Costa Rica, and they were obviously eating meat. But they minimized that part. Like he was pretty sure he was clearly pushing this agenda of getting rid of, like they weren't talking about global warming or these things. But ultimately, he ended up taking these things he learned and bringing them into American cities. He brought it to the country of Singapore, which is a very, Singapore is a beautiful place. And I went to their airport once years and years ago on my first trip to India. But it's very authoritarian and very government heavy. And they charge you $100,000 a year to drive your car, like just to be able to drive a car. Only 12% of the people there drive a car, right? It's a small island that's just one big city. And he was able to implement these policies, but you could see the policies were all Agenda 21 policies, and, they were these 15-minute cities. And he wanted, he rode his bike everywhere. He, made it clear that he had ridden his bike across the globe. Like that was his big claim to fame before doing this thing. And he, like they were pushing for this Agenda 31 stuff. The 15-minute cities are being built everywhere. And, a lot of the things that made people live longer we're being out in the country, being out in nature, being more, tribal and having more of a small family-based, village-based system, very small communities where people lived and took care of each other and, they ate properly and they exercised and all these things. Where they're trying to do this in these, these god-awful cities, right? So it's kind of interesting to watch because it's kind of legitimate. They're showing this to kids in schools. It's kind of legitimate, and it shows, like what makes these people live longer. And some of the things are true, and it's good knowledge, but they twist that knowledge, and they slap it into something that isn't what they're seeing, right? And they're excluding things that aren't, the faith-based thing. They're not really pushing. He talked about people having some sort of faith-based situation, but they don't do anything to help implement that, right? And then the whole eating meat thing and the way that they're living, and a lot of these people are small, small people, 5'4", 5'5", that live a long time, that live in these small villages. Many, most of them, like I said, are close to the ocean, which helps to relieve stress. And the ocean is just people who live near the ocean usually live longer in these things. And turn there, they don't mention anything about eating fish or any of these other things like that, right? And there's things there that they're leaving out that are, they're just doing a bait and switch, basically, is what it is. Anyways, I just thought I'd point those two things out. Only spirituality will save this world. It's Paul Romano, definitely pointing from the Apocalypse. And the Ascension, everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.